John Lane died on January 24th, 1737, 38. He was 86. Dorcas died February 2nd, 1754. She was 92. They are buried in Cove Hill Cemetery, and they are Melissa's 7th great-grandparents. And my father-in-law's 6th great-grandparents. So we have royalty here, Lanesville royalty. So in this binder right here, this binder, there are 11 deeds Melissa and I have transcribed. One dated to 1786 and 10 to 1799. Do you remember what I said, Finson? Finson. One of the deeds is from John and Dorcas Lane's grandson, Ambrose Finson. Ambrose Finson to Aaron Wheeler. He sold land to Aaron Wheeler. Wheeler was Finson's son-in-law. So you have Ambrose Finson, the grandson of John Lane and Dorcas. His son-in-law acquires all this land, all of it. The remaining deeds are the Flake-Right deeds. So Aaron Wheeler sold to the fishermen at Lane's Cove 10 lots. And that's where the Flake-Right deeds came from. The Flake-Rights measured 20 to 22 by 160 feet long, and they had the privilege to use the wharf. They had the rights to unload, load, and unload anything off the old wharf that we saw, right? The old wharf. Also, Wheeler reserved that right for himself. So in 1799, there were already fish houses at Lane's Cove because they were in the deeds, in some of the alignment of the deeds, talked about fish houses down there. So that building right there is sitting on the wharf. That one right there, sitting on the old wharf. And there it is again. That's sitting on the old wharf. Whether it's John Lane's building or not, it probably wasn't, because it probably didn't last that long, from the early 1700s. But I'll tell you, that wharf, part of that wharf was probably part of John Lane's property. And we have to remember, John Lane, he never owned Lane's Cove. He only owned the land around it. Levi Denon, from his obituary in 1899, was a carpenter and a native of Rockport who moved to Lanesville as a young man. He is described as affectionate husband and a father, a kind neighbor, and a good citizen, and was connected with the Lanesville Congregational Church. And I would say that most of the people buried in Langsford Cemetery are from the Congregational Church. Most of them, not all. So he was married 4 times. His wives were Polly J. Rowe of Rockport, Lucy Young, Sarah Young, and Mary Peoples of Lanesville. Together they had 5 sons, 2 daughters, and 1 stepdaughter. In 1854, Levi Denon became the postmaster here. He built an extension on his house for the first post office. A name was needed, and it is rumored that Levi was responsible for naming us Lanesville. At one point, Levi owned and operated the Lanesville stage line, taking over from the Muncie family and later selling it to the Harvey brothers. Levi died at the age of 73 or 75. We haven't quite figured that one out yet. In January of 1899, and he is buried along with 3 of his wives at Langsford Cemetery. Albert Lane. Albert Lane was born October 11, 1834 to Epps and Mary Lane. He married Mary A., the daughter of Epps and Sarah Woodbury, and had at least 2 daughters. They lived at 1036 Washington Street. Oh, I don't have that photo up there, but 1036 Washington Street in 1911. He was a member of the Universalist Church, the Knights of Pythias, and the Order of the Red Men. Albert was a house painter, sold wallpaper, paint, and eggs for hatching, $2 a dozen, at his shop at 1105 Washington Street. That's when you come around the corner back up onto Washington Street. That building just sold again. That was Albert Lane's shop. Albert was a house painter, sold eggs. He sold wallpaper paint eggs, which he later sold to Jesse Main. So Jesse Main owned that at one point. He was a precinct clerk and was the Lanesville's newspaper correspondent for 40 years. Unfortunately, the authors of the newspaper articles were not often credited for their work. In 1859, Albert invited William Lloyd Garrison, Frank's relative, to come to Lanesville to give a lecture on slavery. The invitation was accepted for Friday evening next. The event was well attended. Albert Lane died March of 1916 and is buried in the family lot in Locust Grove Cemetery. We have yet to find his gravestone. We have found that in this period it is difficult to find information on women. But every now and then, there are a few stories which emerge. This is a foster photo, was taken of Mrs. McNish, AKA Drusilla Gray, at Lane's Cove. She was not happy and didn't want her picture taken, so she started running home. Drusilla was born in Maine in about 1835. Her obituary, she is described as coming from old pioneer Yankee stock. Drusilla was married twice, first to Captain Littlefield, with whom she had 2 sons, Dr. Otis and Samuel Littlefield, and second to John McNish. John was a veteran paving cutter who was born in Scotland in 1843. He lived in Lanesville for 45 years. In 1950, they lived at 1 Langsford Street. Mrs. McNish was quite a gardener. She took a squash from her garden on October 18, 1893 that weighed 21.5 pounds. Drusilla was injured in October of 1897 when she was knocked down and trampled by a large crowd trying to get water from a hydrant. After being examined by Doctors Hallett and Rowley, she was found to have internal injuries but recovered. Her husband, John McNish, died on Sunday afternoon, January 7th, 1917. Drusilla died 6 days later and was held in the Lanesville tomb. Now, where is the Lanesville tomb? I don't know, but if anybody knows, let me know. Because that's an interesting point right there. Until spring, when her son could take her to Maine for burial in Asher Gray Cemetery as a burial ground. And like I said, if anybody knows where that Lanesville tomb is, I know the cemetery people don't know because they would have told me. The next is Georgiana Muncie Poland, as described by her friend Helen Henderson in the Gloucester Daily Times on March 21st, 1918. A young slip of a girl